As humans, we have a tendency to categorize things and put them into boxes. It helps us make sense of the world. But sometimes these boxes can become isolated silos. Take art and science as one example. We forget that by creating interaction between these silos, we can create things that are more innovative and impactful. So, to tell us about science and skateboarding and how beautifully linked they are, we're joined by Rodney Mullen. Rodney Mullen, thank you so much. I say for joining us today. Thank you for letting us into your beautiful home, I should say. I'm going to start off by asking if you can introduce yourself in your own words, including the way that you've ended up becoming an engineer, an innovator, and of course, a professional skateboarder.
Thank you. Well, first, I'm honored to have you. This blows my mind. Ultimately, I'm still just a skateboarder. I started out as just a kid who loved math and watching how pieces fit together, played normal sports. And when I watched someone skate, there was something, the freeform nature of it, to me, it showed so much potential without so many rules and regulations of learning a perfect swing. More puzzles. So I kept that in mind. And as I started to look at tricks more as just puzzles, almost from a mathematical engineering kind of problem of breaking them into components. That line of thinking was so embedded in me because as a kid, it's all I loved to do. You know, back then, pre-Legos, erector sets were just nuts and bolts versions of the same. And by the time I started skating, it quickly translated into looking at everything from a perspective of force, leverage, conservation of energy. And quickly I started to outpace people in the neighborhood. Soon enough, they become best in the neighborhood, best in the city, state. And I remember flying out to California the first time. I grew up on a farm with no sense of what anyone else was doing. And by the time I made it out there, I realized all the people I'd seen in the magazines, they were all kind of pack animals. They were following their own thing. And for as athletic or talented, as professional as they seemed, they were still in the same direction. And I think the isolation in itself, combined with looking at things in their component forms, made me veer off into my own direction. And so I was brought back the next year for a world championship, skating as a pro. I think I just turned 14 a few days prior. And I won the contest. And for the life of me, I didn't think I deserved it because I wasn't going their direction. I was doing my own thing. Because this paradigm of do everything you can to be distinctive, but not in the way everyone else does, that is so in line with the general culture of skateboarding itself and why I fit. And I realized for as much as I felt like an outsider in regular ways, or even in school and the courses and the science stuff, which was always my heart, I was always as much of an outsider. I didn't fit into any of that stuff. And skateboarding gave me that outlet as an outsider who felt a sense of belonging among other outsiders who are creating their own path. That mentality has stayed with me ever since. And now fast forward to where I am, holding a title. I think I defended it 35 out of 36 times. And even the credit that I'm given, godfather of modern street skating or whatever, I just see it as I don't deserve that. I was just doing my thing. Because very simply, I was just doing what I've described. And the older I get, and I've always stayed closer to science, the people that I admired, composers in music, Beethoven, Third Symphony, he broke away from Mozart and the rest because self-exile, death. I always liken that to my skating in isolation. You do your own thing. So skateboarding to me, I see as this fusion of kind of an art and an engineering, and sure there's some athleticism, but it's also about looking at things anew and what they could be instead of what they are. And for as much as I know, which is a little bit, I'm not claiming any particular expertise, but because I've been ushered into so many, well, Media Lab, for example, at MIT, and when I meet these kids, 26, 27, we're working on PhDs, when I meet them, sure, for whatever technical background I have, I think the part that I relate to most is that same spirit. This is what makes them great scientists, I believe, why they're there. Because they're looking at the world in similar ways. And the way they see their role is, but what could we do for the rest in our new direction? So this is oddly the way all of these things unfold and connect. So
You say oddly, but I think the way you describe it makes it sound so synergistic. It makes sense. Skateboarding in many ways is sort of a balletic physics, really. And I think that really lends itself to a lot of the things that you've contributed to the sport, not just in the innovation of a range of different moves, the flat ground ollie being maybe the one I referred to as the gateway to so many other things that you have helped develop, but also in your work as an engineer and as an innovator, because you have worked not just in MIT Media Lab, but you've actually developed your own inventions and innovations in skateboarding as well, which have shaped the culture of street skating. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What is it about engineering and innovation that excites you?
thank you. Sure, yeah. So the ollie itself, given credit for it, I think what it did, perfect description, a gateway. It wasn't recognized at all. I remember doing it in a contest in '82. I think I got a Thrasher cover later doing flat ground ollie. No one cared for years until street skating started to emerge, which was an infrastructural change where the insurance companies were suing the skate parks. They were going out of business. It was pushing kids into the streets. And so it became very attuned to culture. When does an invention, an idea, because so many of the tricks we develop, they're hard, they're really hard, and you do them for the sake of being hard. It's a test, that's our nature. But you can't always predict it. You can barely predict it all, what will have relevance. And so the ollie itself sat dormant until the environment changed and unleashed people to simply look at the world a little differently. Of, oh yes, stairs, handrails, ledges, all of it, natural transitions, banks, all of it opens up this opportunity to skate in a new way that wasn't, I should say the equipment at the time was not optimized for that. It was optimized for floating and landing on something stable. They were bigger, wider. And it wasn't until people started to go a little bit rogue and renegade, even from the big companies at the time, they wouldn't develop. They even had the ideas of double kicks, for example. That was a big innovation in skateboarding. People thought of it you need a kick on the tail, right? If a board, right, from head to toe, right, goes this way. They were always kick in the back, basically flat, eventually a little bit of concave. That was for skating pools, vert, to keep you in. And no one thought of, we need more symmetry. And it wasn't until this breakaway culture of street skating started to go rogue, almost in spite of the bigger companies that wanted to hold it to the idea of what they thought it was. So we all, as skaters, become very attuned to do things your own way, make you tinkers. So that, coming from freestyle, we had very small boards. We opened our own company. That was one of the first innovations, is the double kick. We joked because it was so ridiculous, we turned it upside down and called it the double dip, like an ice cream. My friend Rocco did that. Likewise, with the board themselves, we started to very quickly see how people were using them, not as we were sort of told to by the magazines or the forces that be type of thing, but for what the kids were skating, for what their environment was, is, yeah, this thing is, I'm hucking it around, it's holding me back, so, okay, I'll make you a smaller one. So I would spend all my days at the wood shop. There was a certain few years in those early, as street skating was being born, where the boards changed so rapidly from wheel shapes to the truck sizes to even the weights themselves, the design themselves to save aluminum and hollow kingpins and hollow, all this stuff started to become optimized for how to use it best in these environments that are native to us. And it didn't necessarily preclude or make old or obsolete necessarily old designs, because people need big boards, long boards if you're skating downhill. What it did is it expanded the horizon, but it let the people actually doing it participate and get a feel for it. I worked at the urethane companies because I'd come from chemical engineering. I remember what you have is a big book back then of all the different molecules. And you're looking at, polyurethanes are sophisticated. What is durable? There are different tests. You still need rebound, but you can't have it tear. A lot of those need to be optimized. They're pushing against each other, right? So I remember you'd look at the they let me in the back door once I recognized the molecules, and I proved to the chemist on hand, oh yeah, step back here. So I would go through the pages looking for the triple bonds and going, oh, this looks like it won't tear as much. He would cook it up for me. And of course, everything's in how you do it, right? How you cook it. And I would go test it because at that stage, all the chemistry I knew, which was substantial, and I was being coached along by a professional, at some point you just have to ride it, and it was that feeling, and I would pick it up within 5 feet of, no, not this. It's perfect for this, the rollability, but it moves too much, so we have to push them, we have to optimize. And so that accelerated sense of knowing the science and the feel are what really you needed to have them both. Mm-hmm. One skill set only takes you so far and it'll be dead-ended. Mm-hmm. And to be able to communicate both, to be able to sit in the middle, again, which brought me back to original skateboarding, is I looked at the art of it, I feel that, I know I could feel the movement, but at the same time I would always step back to the physics of, for what you feel, you should be standing not looking at all of this, but looking at the opposite. Everything is in your upper body, not your lower body. So I would look at things in, again, the component forms from a physics perspective. I started to do the same things more and more to the products we were developing. And that I've been given a lot of credit for skateboarding. The boards themselves wouldn't be where they are and all that stuff. So yeah, that's what I brought to skateboarding.
I mean, it's amazing. A couple of things that you talk about make me think of so many other conversations I've had. Esther Dyson recently said in one of our Tilda shorts that perhaps rather than doing more research, we can take a moment and really meaningfully interrogate all the information we've already created, all the knowledge that we've already created, because so much of it has been overlooked for its time until it's useful. And this is what makes me think of your flat ground ollie, that in 1982 you did it and everyone went, great, and until they needed it to enable them to do other things. So I find that really interesting. But I also really want to pick up on this discussion of what is effectively community engagement and co-production in innovation, research and development. We know that a range of different minds tackling one problem gives us a range of ways of overcoming that problem. How do you think we can encourage more community engagement in innovation? Because you've been involved in a range of things like in MIT Media Lab, but also in many of the talks that you've done, many of the other visiting positions that you have had as an inventor, as a creator, as an academic, and as a professional skateboarder. How can we encourage more community engagement for innovation, do you think?
Thank you. The Smithsonian took me in, and we worked together. They did something called In a Skate, because they recognized just this, that you're bringing in a fusion of, sure, there is science there, from people who are not necessarily, they wouldn't consider themselves science, and yet they're doing science. So let them understand that, hey, guess what? Open your eyes to what you already know and feel intuitively, but let us help you brush up and recontextualize a lot of those old principles and dusty books in the world around you, whether it's music, video editing, how you skate, what you're building to skate, because there's a lot of that, the DIY stuff, right? And for people, again, all over the world, some people come from areas that are historically, because that's how we're made, they're hot spots. People are good at one particular thing because they grew up around legendary skate park that was full of the best pools, or California and its pools, right? Or in other places all over where it just happens, say Barcelona, for example, where the environment themselves, in a very particular way, it lends itself to be skating in what is really classical, what we think of as street skating. So there's hot spots all over that create little potent, what do you call them? Well, hotspots is the best, little Silicon Valleys, yet for completely different, or I should say, at least slightly different perspectives. And each will add something to skateboarding that the other is not going to come up with no matter what. Some, mega ramp is another big thing. That in itself came from a dude who was really good with moto stuff, Danny Way. He's a genius, he's a physical genius, whatever he does. And he comes from that. He's used to that long air time. That stuff has to be baked in. So sometimes different people who are not necessarily the ones you would think who would make the advancements, they'll have something baked in based on either environmental, historical, maybe doing another sport that's resonant, and suddenly give a contribution that none of these others would ever do. And they have all the best stuff, the companies, the places to skate, the good weather, whatever it is, you would expect all the advancements, but they're not coming. It takes someone else from an entirely different environment. I think one of the better forcing functions that skateboarding has too is that we've always rebelled against the general metrics of contests. There's a good mockumentary called Best in Show, right?
Yep.
Goofy dog stuff.
The dog.
Yeah,
the dog movie, as I call it. Yeah.
That's what contests are. You're cruising around a little course, doing what looks good in a couple of minutes or 45 seconds, whatever you run. And now it's legit. I don't mean to be disparaging, but I have a right to talk because I spent 10 years of my life devoted to Best in Show. And it made me consistent. It made me good at that. Like people become good at school, but they don't offer anything outside. Likewise, contests themselves the winners of the contest don't necessarily, the community doesn't necessarily care to that. You can prove that by board sales, by general influence. The people who change things are in fact not only not the contest winners, they're often not the most beautiful skaters, the perfect athletes. They often look sketchy, but that's part of what makes them cool. What does give them cachet? What does give them merit? What gives them... We are measured by the contribution we make to the community. And that may take years through video parts. That's the classical way of this dude's video part. He's a legend because he did that part, that part. Oh, and by the way, yeah, he won a few contests. Or he never did better than top 20. These are the guys who have the most respect in skateboarding because the culture itself, how we earn and share and rise to prominence in the community, to matter, is by the nature of our contribution. And that's not like a zero-sum thing. It's taking from what other people do and taking a new, fresh perspective. That is an overall forcing function instead of this zero-sum game of you win, you lose, that in itself lends towards sharing. And that breeds a healthier, more progressive, because we all understand, we know what it takes to change things, and we know you have to untether. It's not by doing something as good as the next guy and slightly better. It's by doing it and taking it in another direction. And that in itself, this, hey man, it's not win or lose, we're in this together. That mentality is something that I think is worth sharing. I think even Jet Propulsion Lab, I went there and I found myself, what do they want with me? They wanted something from us. How can we translate that to what we do? And it was just beautiful. So anyway, I think that there's a lot to be gained from culture itself. How do we include other people by not these classical metrics? Instead, we rebel against those metrics. And we prioritize overall contribution from a different perspective.
I think that's a perfect way to lead into my next question, which is something that you and I are both very passionate about. And it sounds odd when I say it, speaking to a professional skateboarder, but that thing is failure and the value that failure plays in successfully innovating towards something that really makes a difference. Do you think we need to do more to embrace failure and really understand the value of it? Does it need a whole rebrand and a refresh?
Thank you. Yes, I wish a friend of mine, he's awesome. He sees crazy things by the nature of his work. And he goes, I wish I could tear out my eyes and put them in your head. In a similar way, in our community, most of what you see through YouTube, the videos, it takes days, if not weeks, if not longer, especially you get hurt and you have to heal up for a few months and go back to something to be able to finally do it. We often make tricks only once. And as long as that pushes it forward, that's all that matters, because someone will take that and normalize it. They will. Eventually, that stuff we did one time, that's what kids are doing today. They're doing it 3 out of 5.
Yeah. Like you're impossible.
So it is to say that the nature of our community, most of what we do is fall and get back up again, which shapes you in a way that undergirds your very thought processes. You can't just wake up, oh, I'm going to toughen up. It doesn't work that way. You have to hurt. You have to feel. You have to get up and go after it again when everything is screaming no. If you do that enough, a lot of time, it's like love. I think it's the nature of love, right? It's not all roses, right? Relationships. But you keep going back to it because you love it. What else would you be doing? It's who you are. That is, in terms of skating, a lot of us, like, for example, schoolyards or some rail or whatever it is, you got to deal with security. You can only hit it at a particular time. You go in there and you give it all you have. Things are cramping and you're hitting. You hit so many times that eventually every time you touch it, your body is just ringing. You get through the end of the day, you almost there, you land it. Or sometimes you flick it right, but you don't have the courage to throw your feet on. You're like, oh my God, I had it. It was the one perfect one. And you'll see guys punching themselves in their head. And you go home at the end of the day, you failed. Not because you fell 1,000 times, but because you couldn't bring it home. You do that enough, it changes something in you that hardens you. I know, you know this expression, all dressed up and no place to go. There are lots of incredible athletes, guys who are like much better specimens certainly than I, or a lot of the best skaters who are ever. They have everything, but the one thing they lack is the only thing you can't give them, which is how do you handle failure? To get back up and go again, and to wake up in the night like, oh wait, I know what it is. You go out fresh, and a lot of times you'll make it right away the next day as soon as you warm up. So my point is by embracing failure and having a community that understands of what it takes, the nature of what skateboarding really is. Kids go to demos these days, you watch, and you'll be happy to see someone make 3 tricks, like 3 good tricks. And most of it is they're just bailing all day. That's what skateboarding is. Yeah. We all get that, and it shapes us proportionally. We get it. So when you go to other areas where I'm like, gosh, that's so crazy. I think it's what made us so good at business, because we're so good at failing, recognizing and trying stuff. Yeah, just try. The flip side, there is an overhype of fail faster, all that stuff. You're like, maybe if you're coding, I guess depends on what you're coding, but in skateboarding, if you fail a certain way, you might not come back from that. There is a lack of realism of like, just fail faster. It doesn't work that way. One fall in a certain way. A lot of what we do, it is a form of experimentation. You're trying stuff that's never been done before. You don't even know if it's possible. And there are certain ways if you fall that you will definitely be taken out. And so you're working out the whole way of, but how do I handle failure so it's sustainable? And there's an art to that. And the best skaters, I often think about this, but the best skaters are the best fallers. Precisely why? The first thing if someone's learning to skate, okay, I don't want to teach you all these tricks how to. First, I want to teach you to fall, because then you'll be able to sustain it. And then you'll free your mind so you can actually learn. So this culture of learning out of failure, I will say this is when I got to the Media Lab, I was recruited, a guy called me, where would you do this, right? That's recruiting. To what was called MIT Fail, because all those kids are so bright. They're all geniuses, and they're not used to not being the best. And so what he would do is bring out some fairly legendary, often faculty from Harvard, MIT. The one I did, I think they were they were all faculty, either Harvard, MIT, and they talked about their failures, and they wouldn't be who they were without those failures. And that in itself was huge, not only for mental health, but how we go about things.
Yeah. I think learning to fail successfully, I know it sounds ridiculous, is such a strong skill to have. In fact, my school, before I went to university, is part of a chain of schools where they ran something called Failure Week, because the world tells you that you must succeed, you must be the best at everything you try and do. And actually, I think it sets people up in a position where they are afraid to fail. But with failure, you're at least taking risks, you're trying something different, you're trying something new. And really, that is the root of so much invention and innovation. It really is. We've had conversations about invention and innovation. We've had lots of conversations about new technologies. There's lots of tech that is influencing the way that we do things in life, and also, of course, in sport and art, just like skateboarding. Tell me your thoughts on what innovation and invention mean to you, and maybe the role that technology is playing in that.
Yes. So I'll begin with one of the guys in the Media Lab who is a super genius, and he is so fun, and his spirit is he's like Tigger, he just bounces around. And he's a neuroscientist. And in my caveman way, I don't know anything about it. And he goes, well, the essence is to see and experience something differently. And I thought, I will never know the depths of what he really means by that statement, right? But I think I kind of get it. So back to this idea of, like I say, ollie was just a seesaw motion that's the essence of an ollie, that I use as a transfer trick that didn't even matter. It wasn't even a thought. It was just a setup trick. Way to snap from my nose to tail, tail to nose. And it wasn't until I saw it in a new context. Alan Gelfand ollied on vert, weightless. There was no seesaw motion to it. He just unweighted and kept it on his feet. And that was the vert ollie. And as soon as I saw him do it, it opened my eyes. I saw it differently. It unlocked. It's a kind of technology. It unlocked its IP. It unlocked like, oh, this simple mechanism, this form, this movement, It thought about it. Oh, I saw it on Sunday night when he came to the park. I went to school, drifted off. I got home, and by the end of the day, I could ollie over a foot.
Wow.
As simple as that. And then again, nobody cared. It was an invention. It was new, but it was cobbled. Wasn't an invention. It was a variation. Which brings you back to the Media Lab. Another saying they had, because they're making their own circuit boards that they do from the ground up. They go, all new tech is really just old tech. And I thought, oh gosh, I relate to that. So you talk about technology or perspective, shifting a perspective, and suddenly when is something an invention versus a variation? That's gray area for those who really know. For really good skaters, you're like, yeah, that dude's whole part, 3-4 minutes of 40 tricks. He's basically got 3 movements. That's how we see things, right? In a similar way. It took this shift of perspective to unlock when is a variation, an invention, and then when it becomes an innovation is when it becomes useful to others in a way that it's not only being used, but it's this push-pull yin-yang relationship with how you use it, and that bounces back into the hardware of reshaping the skateboards themselves, which it did for the next years, decade, and that completely reshaped of how we skated and then even related as a community, and how did technology, one of the biggest technological changes was videotapes, because we could share, and then of course YouTube. And when it comes to skateboarding, there's also something back to this invention versus innovation. Yeah, there's a lot of patents that are never used. Those aren't innovations. The idea is even the simplest thing, and it might not even be an innovation. It can just be, depending on how you look at it, a variation, right? A restructuring, but transposed into a slightly different world, and it explodes into not only hardware, tricks suddenly, like you called it, what was it, a gateway, right? The ollie, to dozens, if not hundreds of tricks, which brings you to entirely new environments of how they build skate parks, which is a kind of, right? How we share it, how that ripples into culture itself. So how does technology, they're all forms of it, it's all fluid, they're all woven together, and the cultures, the tech skaters versus the hash skaters versus downhill, they're all different. But they all influence each other, and then we influence snowboarding. Those dudes are flying around, flying 20 feet high and grabbing a board that's actually bound to their feet, which is ridiculous, but it shows that, hey, that's our fingerprint. So how do we share? How does culture transmit ideas? Like the way they're all woven together, I think this sensitizes you to how important and how subtle almost it's the butterfly flapping of wings, where a simple reconfiguring, refactoring of ideas can cause an explosion that ripples into even the outskirts of culture, from music to how we dress.
Mm-hmm. I think there are so many parallels as well between what you've talked about and what we see in research. You talk about invention or innovation versus variation. When I think about microscopy or telescopy, both ends of the scale, a small change in how a telescope gathers light or a small change in how a microscope allows you to see something at a small scale gives rise to so much new research. It enables so much. And so I do think actually you're right, variations, maybe they're sometimes overlooked or underplayed, but they do have a massive impact on the way that we do things and in changing the culture and unlocking so much more in terms of avenues of exploration and further innovation. So I think it's really exciting.
Absolutely. And the very subtle layers, when I talk to, again, skate community, musicians, right? So many. And dude comes from playing drums, and he picks up guitars. It's like, do you have a signature of being a drummer in the way you play guitar? And he'll be like, yeah, it's funny you say that. And like guys that, good editors, I got to work with a really professional editor when I did Liminal. And like pro. I'd never seen that before. It was an amazing experience. And he had been a musician first. And what he said is, you can see the signature of being a musician in the way people edit. And I thought that was profound. Likewise, coming from, I think of Shaun White. He's a pro snowboarder, but he comes from skateboarding. And when he brings snowboarding back to skateboarding, because he has access to all this weird airtime and the rotations, it's similar enough, but just far enough, right? Through parallax, we yield dimension. And that's what he does. And I'm curious about people who make microscopes as opposed to telescopes. If they shift from one world and they bring some sort of layer of understanding that is completely foreign to the other, but enhances, because that's so much what the skate community is about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to almost come back to the very beginning of the things that I asked you for my final question. I know that I introduced you as an engineer, as an innovator, as a professional skateboarder. If you could combine all of those three things, what is the next step in skateboarding? What challenges remain to be overcome? And do you think technology will play a role in that? Do you think it will be the community driving that? Or do you think it will be a marriage of all of those things and more?
What a profound question from you. Not an easy answer. In many ways, all of the above. Look, famously, I think it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I'll just say personally. I always admired musicians. My mom could play the piano, concert level. And I always admired her because you continued to get better and better and better and better. Close enough to the end. We, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, athletes die twice. Your body gives. And I will tell you that when it starts to give, I can't, even when I was in New York, I was skating, I got 2 new hips, I'm learning basic, and I see dudes over there, and they're like, and I felt shame because I'm not that guy anymore. And for as much as that might seem odd from an outside, believe me, when you feel it, you're like, I suck. I'm a fraud. I'm not that dude. I'm sorry. And so I cruise up to him like, hey, I'm sorry. And they're looking at me. I was like, we know. And they were, thank you for what you. And so I will very frankly say, for as much as I understand with it, what do we have? 100 million neurons in our belly, right? Our isness, our being, it's not just here. It's this, it's all of it. So where I'm going is what advances skateboarding? What is the nature of the community is that we will not be defined, compressed by your metrics of what we should be. We are who we are, right? Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground, what was it? I'm not your keys to be played, however it was. Mm-hmm. That's the core community, and that ethos is one of the reasons why it's so progressive, so open, so raw, so real, because it can't be polished into something that becomes so precious. Its nature is to be dinged up. You're respected more for being dinged up. So as we move ourselves forward, there is something to be said like the wild animals. An elder should know when its time is done. Go over. Die alone. And there's honor in that. And truly, believe me, that's how I felt. Die alone, meaning disappear from the scene. But like an animal does. Yeah? I will tell you, I am not vying for influence. I'm not, that is my nature is to be a hermit. Yeah, just check around. I'm not in stuff. But when you see, I do see, I don't want to say a necessity, but an opportunity for contribution for call them the elders. As times change, the forcing functions are sheer aggregates. The weight of aggregation, meaning everybody's doing it and it must be good. Because we're kind of pack animals as human beings. I think that there is something to be said for dudes like Lance Mountain, right, or regional people that have gone through every bit of it to say, yeah, but be careful of seeking attention for attention's sake, for all the social media hype or the commercialism, because there is more money to be made that can easily distract you from doing what you loved in the first place. Because to be good at that level, and you think of Feynman and the Nobel Prize, what did he call it? The tombstone on all great work. Or in film, how many people you see, this person here was an Academy Award winner and they are promoting this, won't put words to it. Don't let that happen to you. Sometimes getting what you think you wanted can quench the fire that got you there in the first place. And if there's anything I know from the nature of skateboarding and its physicality and the nature of technology and how we are moved together, it has always been of reject the old. There's something about that. But there's also, recognize what is drawing you there in the first place so you don't become so homogenized. Because that in itself can militate against progress, and that's what contest did to me. And again, I only say that from a perspective of having won so many, that I know the weight they carried and how free I felt when I was able to just do what I loved for the sake of it. So clearly I must have strayed from what we were supposed to talk about, but if there's one thing I would like to get across that I think is so crucial, that in my own life, that for all of us as human beings, we all seek praise, we all want to be loved, we all want to excel, we all want to go to the bed, yeah. But always embrace outsiders. Always find a way to go back to what's uncomfortable, what doesn't promise any rewards, because often that's where the soil is the richest for something new. So, yeah.
I think it's such a nice way to wrap up. I think there's so many, again, parallels to not just skateboarding or just research, but society more broadly, that frameworks are great to encourage progress, but frameworks shouldn't hold us back. We can be respectful to what has happened before, but we need to be in a space where we can take safe enough risks to progress and to innovate. And I think you have demonstrated that so beautifully in the stories that you've shared with us today. Rodney Mullen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.